There's a specific kind of torture in being deeply, quietly in love with your straight best friend. You build walls, you accept the boundaries. But the second another guy bought me a drink and leaned in close, those boundaries didn't just blur. They violently collapsed. I had rules. If you're a gay man in love with your straight best friend, you have to have rules. Otherwise, you lose your mind. Rule number 1, never stare when he changes his shirt. Keep your eyes on the television, your phone, the peeling paint on the ceiling, anywhere but the hard, defined lines of his stomach. Rule number 2, be the sounding board for his endless looping girlfriend drama without offering advice that sounds self-serving. Rule number 3, and this was the most important one, never, under any circumstances, mistake his casual physical affection for something real. Caleb was a tactile guy. He grew up with 3 older brothers in a house where love was expressed through headlocks, shoved shoulders, and sprawling across the same couch to watch football. He brought that exact same energy to our friendship. He would throw a heavy arm around my neck when he was drunk. He would press his knee against mine under cramped restaurant tables. He took up space, and he expected me to just exist in his orbit. For 3 years, I did. I built a cynical, calloused armor around myself to survive the proximity. I convinced myself I was perfectly fine being his sidekick. Until a Tuesday night in late October, we were at the Alibi, a dingy neighborhood bar that smelled like stale yeast and lemon bleach. It was our usual spot. We were sitting at the corner of the polished oak bar, and Caleb was currently halfway through a rant about his recently ex-girlfriend Chloe. "I just don't get it, Liam," Caleb said, dragging a thick finger through the condensation pooling at the base of his pint glass. He was wearing a faded gray hoodie pushed up to his elbows, looking comfortably messy. "She said I was emotionally unavailable. I bought her a dog. How is that emotionally unavailable?" "You bought her a tarantula, Caleb," I replied, taking a slow sip of my bourbon. "That's a hostage situation, not a pet." He let out a short, rough laugh, the kind that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. "Spiders are low maintenance. Like me." He nudged his shoulder against mine, a heavy, solid weight. "You get it. You don't ask me to process my childhood trauma every time I forget to text back. That's because my expectations of you are already subterranean," I deadpanned. He grinned, lifting his glass. To subterranean expectations, we clinked glasses. It was comfortable. It was safe. It was the exact dynamic I had engineered to keep my heart from bleeding out on the floor. Caleb turned his attention to the muted baseball game playing on the screen above the liquor bottles. I checked my phone. That's when Reese walked in. I noticed him immediately, because he didn't belong in the Alibi. The Alibi was for guys who wore work boots and drank domestic lagers. Reese was wearing a tailored navy peacoat over a crisp, dark shirt. He had sharp cheekbones, dark hair styled with deliberate care, and a quiet, relaxed confidence that immediately commanded attention. I looked at him. He looked at me. There was a beat of absolute, unmistakable recognition. The gay radar didn't just ping, it went off like a smoke alarm. I looked away, staring down at my ice cubes, feeling a sudden, strange flush of heat in my neck. When I glanced back up 2 minutes later, Reese was walking purposefully toward our end of the bar. There was an empty stool to my left. Caleb was seated to my right, completely oblivious, currently cursing at the television because a batter struck out. Reese slid onto the stool. He smelled like expensive cedar and cold city air. "I tried to order a gin and tonic from the bartender down there," Reese said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that easily cut through the background noise. He looked at me like I asked him to solve a calculus equation. I laughed, surprised by the easy charm. You have to stick to the local dialect here. Order a whiskey neat or a beer on tap. Anything requiring a garnish is viewed as an act of aggression. Reese smiled. It was a slow, deliberate smile. He turned his body entirely toward me, boxing out the rest of the room. Noted, I'm Reese. Liam. Well, Liam, he said, leaning in just a fraction of an inch closer. I could see the gold flecks in his dark brown eyes. Can I buy you that whiskey? I've got a drink, I said, pointing to my half-empty glass. Then I'll buy your next one. He reached out, his long fingers lightly tapping the edge of my coaster. It was a simple movement, but it bridged the gap between us. Unless you're waiting for someone, he knew I wasn't. He had been watching me. The attention was intoxicating. I was so used to being the invisible, cynical wingman for Caleb's messy romances that I had forgotten what it felt like to be the center of someone's gravity. I felt myself sitting up straighter, leaning into the warmth of his interest. No, I said, matching his eye contact. I'm not waiting for anyone. To my right, the air suddenly changed. I didn't need to look at Caleb to know his posture had shifted. The relaxed, sprawling energy he usually projected vanished. It felt like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. I saw his hand, previously resting loosely on the bar, tighten around his pint glass. Hey, Caleb's voice was flat, hard, completely stripped of its usual warmth. Reese didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes locked on mine. So, do you live around here, Liam? Or do you just enjoy bars that smell like regret? I opened my mouth to answer, but Caleb cut in before I could make a sound. He's with me. The words landed heavily on the sticky wooden bar. I turned to look at my best friend, genuinely startled. Caleb was leaning forward, his broad shoulders squared, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscle jumped beneath his skin. He was staring at Reese with a level of open hostility I had never seen from him. Reese finally turned his head, looking Caleb up and down with an amused, slightly patronizing expression. Is that right? You two are together. We're friends, I corrected quickly, shooting Caleb a warning glare. We're roommates. Roommates, Reese repeated, his amusement deepening. He looked back at me, his gaze dropping briefly to my mouth before meeting my eyes again. Well, I don't see a ring on your finger, Liam. My offer stands. Caleb didn't say a word. He didn't yell. He didn't posture in a loud, typical bar fight way. Instead, he stood up. He pulled a $20 bill from his pocket, slapped it down on the bar with a sharp smack, and looked down at me. We're leaving, Caleb said. It wasn't a suggestion. I sat there, stunned. I haven't finished my drink. Leave it. I looked at Reese, embarrassed by the sudden, bizarre outburst. Reese simply pulled a pen from the inside pocket of his coat, grabbed a napkin, and quickly scrawled a series of numbers across it. He slid it across the wood, right under Caleb's nose, and tapped it twice. Text me, Liam, when you don't have a chaperone. I grabbed the napkin, shoving it into my jacket pocket, my face burning. I stood up, practically chasing Caleb as he turned on his heel and stormed toward the exit, his heavy boots echoing on the floorboards. The walk back to our apartment was less than 5 blocks. Normally, this was the time Caleb would talk loudly about the stars, or complain about his boss, or stop at the corner bodega for cheap pizza slices. Tonight, he was a ghost. He walked fast, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie, his shoulders rigid against the biting October wind. I had to jog to keep up with his long strides. The silence between us was suffocating, thick with an ugly, unnameable tension. I was angry, but beneath the anger, there was a frantic, confused pulse beating in my throat. "What the hell was that?" I finally snapped as we crossed onto our street. Caleb didn't stop walking. Guy was a creep. He wasn't a creep, Caleb. He was hitting on me. He was slick. I don't like guys who look like they practice their smiles in the mirror. "You don't even know him?" I pushed my pace, stepping directly in front of him to force him to stop. He halted, breathing heavily, the street lamp casting harsh shadows across his face. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "I know the type," Caleb said, his voice a low, rough scrape. "He saw you sitting there and thought he could just swoop in, like you were easy. Oh, and you're the great defender of my virtue now?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. I was losing my temper, the cynical armor cracking under the weight of his sudden, baffling interference. "Since when do you care who I talk to? You actively try to wingman me with the worst guys on the planet. Last month you tried to set me up with a guy who collected vintage taxidermy." "That was different," Caleb muttered, looking away. He stared at the cracked pavement. "How? How is it different?" "It just is!" He stepped around me, aggressively digging his keys out of his pocket as we reached the steps of our apartment building. He jammed the key into the front door, twisting it with unnecessary force. I followed him inside, the heavy metal door clicking shut behind us. We lived on the second floor. The stairs creaked under our weight. I was practically vibrating with frustration. I had spent 3 years burying my feelings for this man, watching him date an endless parade of women, listening to his heartbreak, patching up his ego. I asked for nothing. I expected nothing. And the first time someone actually looks at me, he ruins it. We stepped into the apartment. It was dark, the only light coming from the street lamps bleeding through the living room blinds. Caleb threw his keys onto the kitchen counter. They hit the ceramic fruit bowl with a loud crash. I took off my jacket, tossing it onto the armchair. The napkin with Reese's number fell out, fluttering lightly onto the hardwood floor. We both looked at it. Before I could move, Caleb crossed the room in 2 long strides. He bent down, snatching the napkin off the floor. "Give that back," I demanded, holding my hand out. Caleb looked at the numbers written in blue ink. His jaw worked in a slow, grinding rhythm. "You're actually going to call this asshole?" "Yes," I lied. I hadn't decided yet, but his possessiveness was making me insane. "I'm going to text him right now because he's handsome, he has a job, and he actually noticed me. Give me the paper." Caleb didn't hand it back. Instead, he crushed the napkin in his massive fist, balling it up into a tight, wrinkled wad. "What is wrong with you?" I yelled, stepping toward him. "Are you drunk? You're acting like a lunatic." "I'm not drunk," he fired back, his voice rising to match mine. "I just don't want you going out with a guy who looks at you like you're a piece of meat. That's how guys look at guys, Caleb. It's called attraction. It's called wanting someone." I was breathing hard, the words tearing out of my chest. I couldn't stop them. The cynical dam had finally broken. Not everyone is looking to buy a dog and play house. Some people just want to be wanted. But you wouldn't get that, would you? Because you walk through the world and everyone just hands you whatever you ask for. "That's not fair," he growled, stepping into my space. "It's entirely fair!" I tilted my head up to glare at him. We were inches apart now. I could feel the heat radiating off his body. I could smell the faint trace of his soap mixed with the stale beer from the bar. You get to have whoever you want. You get Chloe and Sarah and whatever other girl catches your eye. And I sit here and I listen and I nod and I play my part. The least you can do is let me have one night where someone looks at me and actually sees me. I see you, Caleb said. The volume of his voice dropped entirely. It wasn't a yell anymore. It was a rough, breathless whisper that hit me like a physical blow. He didn't step back. He stepped closer. The toes of his boots bumped against mine. The physical proximity was overwhelming. This wasn't the careless, sprawling touch of a straight bro on a couch. This was deliberate. This was a man positioning himself directly in my gravitational pull, refusing to let me look away. I see you, he repeated, his chest rising and falling rapidly. My heart slammed against my ribs. Caleb, I warned, my voice shaking. I didn't know what I was warning him against. I didn't know what was happening. Don't what? His eyes, normally so bright and open, were dark. They tracked down my face, dragging slowly over the bridge of my nose, resting heavily on my mouth. He stayed there for one agonizing, endless second. I couldn't breathe. My brain was short-circuiting. Rule number 3. Never mistake his physical comfort for romantic interest. But this wasn't comfort. This was raw, volatile tension. Don't play games with me, I whispered, feeling completely exposed. I can't handle it if you're just protecting your territory. Caleb's hand twitched at his side. The crumpled napkin fell from his grip, hitting the floor with a soft thud. He slowly lifted his hand, his heavy, calloused fingers hovering just an inch from my jaw. I stopped breathing entirely. I was terrified he would touch me. I was terrified he wouldn't. I'm not playing a game, Liam, he said, his voice cracking slightly. He didn't touch me. He froze. The panic suddenly flooded back into his eyes, violently washing away whatever temporary madness had just possessed him. He realized where he was. He realized how close he was standing. Caleb let out a harsh breath, stepping backward as if he had touched a hot stove. He ran both hands through his hair, turning away from me, his broad shoulders rising in a defensive hunch. I'm going to bed, he muttered to the wall, his voice devoid of all the heat and fire from a moment ago. He didn't wait for a response. He walked quickly down the narrow hallway, retreating into his bedroom. The door shut with a definitive, hollow click. I stood alone in the dark living room, staring at the closed door, the phantom heat of his body still lingering against my skin. I looked down at the crumpled napkin on the floor. Everything I knew about my best friend, about my boundaries, about my own survival, had just been ripped apart. And I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do tomorrow. Morning came with the cruel, glaring light of a Wednesday. I didn't sleep. I spent 6 hours staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the rhythmic, heavy thud of Caleb's footsteps in the room next door. He was pacing. The realization should have felt like a victory, but it just felt like a slow-motion car crash. When I finally dragged myself out of bed at 7, the smell of burnt coffee and frying bacon permeated the hallway. It was a pathetic, aggressive attempt at normalcy. I walked into the kitchen. Caleb was standing by the stove. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a white t-shirt. his hair damp from the shower. He looked exactly like the guy I had lived with for 2 years. The guy who left his wet towels on the floor and ate my expensive cereal. But the air between us was entirely different. It felt thin, combustible. "Morning," he said. His voice was a little too loud, a little too forced. He scraped a metal spatula violently across the Teflon pan. "Made eggs." "I'm not hungry," I said, walking straight to the coffee pot. "You gotta eat, Liam. You drank half a bottle of bourbon on an empty stomach." I stopped pouring my coffee. I set the glass carafe down with a sharp clack against the granite counter. "Are we going to do this?" Caleb didn't turn around. His shoulders went rigid beneath the thin cotton of his shirt. "Do what?" "Play dumb." I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Act like last night was just another Tuesday. Act like you didn't drag me out of a bar by the scruff of my neck because another guy asked for my number." "I was looking out for you," he mumbled, staring down at the sizzling eggs. Bullshit. The word hung in the kitchen, sharp and absolute. Caleb finally turned around. The forced casual ease was gone, replaced by a deep, dark exhaustion. He looked incredibly tired. The bags under his eyes matched my own. "Look," Caleb started, running a hand through his damp hair. It was his nervous tell. "I overreacted. I was pissed about Chloe, and I was drinking, and that guy, he just rubbed me the wrong way. I'm sorry. I crossed a line." It was the perfect straight guy apology. A neat little package of excuses tied up with a bow of circumstantial stress. Blame the ex. Blame the alcohol. Pack it all away in a box and shove it into the back of the closet so we can go back to watching football and drinking beers on the couch. A year ago, I would have taken it. I would have swallowed the bitter pill, accepted the apology, and gone back to my safe, painful existence as his invisible, emotional anchor. But not today. I reached into the pocket of my jeans. I pulled out the crumpled, smoothed-over bar napkin. Reese's number was slightly smudged, but entirely legible. I set it flat on the kitchen island between us. Caleb's eyes dropped to the paper. His jaw clenched so hard I thought I heard his teeth grind. "What are you doing?" he asked quietly. "I'm going to text him," I said. My voice was remarkably steady, despite the chaotic rhythm of my pulse. "I'm going to text him, and I'm going to ask him to dinner, because he wants me. And I am tired of living in the shadow of a guy who doesn't know what he wants." "Don't," Caleb said. "Give me one good reason." "Because I'm asking you not to." "Not good enough, Caleb." I grabbed my phone from the counter and unlocked it. I tapped open a new message and started punching in the digits from the napkin. I didn't actually want to text Reese. The thought of making small talk with a stranger felt exhausting. But I needed Caleb to jump, or I needed him to walk away. I couldn't survive the purgatory anymore. "Liam, stop. 555. I read the numbers aloud, deliberately slow. "I said stop." He closed the distance between us in 2 heavy strides. He didn't grab the phone. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was tight, desperate, his large hand wrapping entirely around my forearm. The sudden intense heat of his skin against mine sent a shockwave straight up my spine. I froze. I looked up at him. He was breathing hard, staring down at me with a panicked, cornered expression. We were standing exactly as we had the night before in the dark living room, but now the kitchen lights were blindingly bright. There were no shadows to hide behind, no alcohol to blame, just the harsh, unyielding reality of a Wednesday morning. "Why?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Why do you care?" "You know why," he breathed. "No, I don't. Tell me." He shook his head, looking desperately at the ceiling, then back at me. "If I say it, if we do this, everything changes, Liam. You're my best friend. You're the only thing in my life that actually makes sense. This doesn't make sense." I pulled my wrist out of his grip, though the ghost of his touch remained, burning into my skin. "You date women. You break their hearts, or they break yours, and I pick up the pieces. That's our dynamic. If you step over this line, there is no going back. You don't get to experiment with me, Caleb. You don't get to figure your shit out on my time." "I'm not experimenting," he shouted, his voice cracking violently. The volume startled us both. The kitchen suddenly felt completely silent, save for the spitting grease on the stove. Caleb swallowed hard. His chest heaved. He looked terrified. "I'm not experimenting," he repeated, softer this time. A broken, raw confession. "I've spent 3 years pretending I don't look at you. I've spent 3 years dating girls who complain that I'm not present because I am always thinking about where you are. I saw that guy look at you last night, and I felt like I was dying." The world stopped spinning. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside our window, it all vanished. He said it, the words I had spent 1,000 nights praying for, and 1,000 mornings convincing myself I would never hear. They didn't sound like a romantic movie script. They sounded like a casualty report. They sounded like a man bleeding out. I stared at him, my cynical armor completely shattered on the kitchen floor. "Caleb," I started, but my throat closed up. He didn't let me finish. The panic in his eyes finally gave way to something else, something resolute, something reckless. He stepped directly into my space. The physical barrier between us, the 3 years of careful distance, the platonic shoulder shoves, the cautious avoidance of lingering eye contact, was instantly obliterated. He brought both of his hands up, framing my face. His palms were rough and calloused, warm against my jaw. His thumbs traced the line of my cheekbones. He was shaking. My big, loud, untouchable, straight best friend was trembling violently. "I don't know how to do this," Caleb whispered, his forehead dropping to rest heavily against mine. "I don't know what the rules are." "There are no rules," I breathed, closing my eyes, leaning into the heavy, grounding weight of his hands. "Just jump." He jumped. Caleb tilted his head and kissed me. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't practiced or smooth. It was a collision. It was 3 years of repressed, suffocating denial finally breaking violently to the surface. His mouth was hard and desperate, tasting like burnt coffee and mint toothpaste. I gasped against his lips, my hands flying up to grip the front of his white t-shirt, bunching the fabric in my fists as I anchored myself to him. He made a low, rough sound in the back of his throat, a sound of pure relief, and pulled me flush against his body. His arm wrapped around my waist, lifting me slightly onto my toes. I could feel every line of him, solid and warm, and finally, undeniably mine. I kissed him back with equal ferocity, pouring every ounce of my silent, agonizing patience into the space between us. I bit down slightly on his bottom lip, pulling a sharp breath from his chest. He shifted his grip, one hand sliding to the back of my neck, his fingers twisting into my hair to hold me exactly where he wanted me. We stayed like that for a long time, backed up against the kitchen counter, tearing apart the entire foundation of our lives and building something entirely new in its place. When he finally pulled away, we were both breathless. Caleb rested his forehead against mine again, his chest rising and falling heavily against my own. His eyes were open, searching mine, shedding the last remnants of his fear. The dark exhaustion in his expression had been replaced by a bright electric clarity. He slowly moved one hand from my waist, reaching down to the kitchen island. Without looking away from my eyes, he picked up the crumpled bar napkin with Reese's number on it. He dropped it into the trash can beside the counter. "No more wingman," Caleb said, his voice a low, steady rumble that vibrated against my chest. I smiled, a genuine, breathless smile, tracing the heavy line of his jaw with my thumb. "No more hostages." He let out a short, rough laugh, the sound I loved more than anything in the world. He leaned in, kissing me again, slower this time, softer. A promise, not a panic. The smoke alarm above the stove suddenly started blaring, a shrill, piercing shriek that shattered the quiet intimacy of the kitchen. We both jumped, pulling apart. Caleb looked over his shoulder. The frying pan was smoking heavily, the eggs reduced to charred, unrecognizable black husks. He looked back at me, a sheepish, crooked grin spreading across his face. I think breakfast is ruined." "That's fine," I laughed, reaching up to silence the alarm with a dish towel. I looked at the man who used to be my best friend, the man who was now standing entirely in my corner. "We can order in." Have you ever crossed the point of no return with someone you thought you knew? That one morning tore down 3 years of boundaries, and we're still navigating the messy, beautiful fallout. If you resonated with this complicated reality of falling for a best friend, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs a push to take the leap, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deeply grounded stories about love, risk, and everything in between.